Hey, happy Sunday and welcome to the Morning Stretch. I'm your host, Tony Herbert. This week, we're going to continue our discussion on NYCHA housing. Earlier this week, I had a chance to sit down and talk with Richie Torres, a Bronx City councilman representing the 15th Councilmanic District and the former chair of the Committee on Public Housing. I also had a conversation with Ms. Arlene Park. She's the vice chair and CEO of Diego Beekman Mutual Housing Association. Ms. Park and her association transformed a crime-riddled housing development in the Bronx into a community that can be used as a model for all public housing. But first, let's listen to Richie Torres. First, we need to clear some air first and foremost, because I've been very critical of some of the stances that you've not taken, or assumed that you've not taken. You were council chair, chair of the Committee on Public Housing from like 2014 to 2017. Yep. We saw no activity whatsoever inside of New York City housing. So the question is, what's different now?
I guess my question is, who's we? Because you might have seen no activity, but there are plenty of people who saw me advocate aggressively on behalf of public housing residents. And look, speak to someone like Greg Smith, who's the chief investigative reporter on matters of public housing, and ask him whether I've been quiet on public housing. You know, when I first became the public housing chair, we held a public housing hearing in a public housing development, the first of its kind, on emergency boilers. That hearing paved the way for a $3 billion FEMA investment in public housing. Or when Akai Gurley was shot at the hands of a police officer in a poorly lit stairwell in pink houses, we immediately held a hearing that led to a $100 million city investment in lighting. Or when Julio Pabon was killed in a dysfunctional elevator in Boston Road Plaza, we immediately held a hearing that led to the repair of the brake monitors, which was at the core of the crisis. So I have been outspoken from day one. I've been a critic of the mayor from day one. I've been a critic of the governor when I've disagreed with the governor. So, am I perfect? No, but I'm a young man who's up against the most powerful elected official in New York City, the mayor, up against a powerful bureaucracy that refuses to reform itself, and I'm often alone in these struggles.
Now, that identity with regards to being up against this mayor, that has not actually come into fruition until this cycle, which I commend you on, because we need more people out here holding this mayor to task. But the underlying question is, all of the attention now that NYCHA is getting from elected officials, what makes you think that's the case right now?
I just have to disagree with you. Your facts are wrong. I have been a critic of the mayor from day one. Our relationship has gone through...
We're talking about all of the elected officials now. You might have been there, but now we see a whole bunch of people running to the developments now. So my concern is what brings that about?
I think the crisis in public housing, which has been simmering for decades, I think has reached a crisis point. We saw one of the worst winter cold spells that we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. NYCHA was in denial about the scale of the heating crisis. The mayor, the chairperson, publicly said that more than 97% of residents in public housing had consistent heat and hot water. And so we did something that council's never done. We conducted our own investigation, and we found that 323,000 residents had no heat and hot water at various points of the heating season. And so when you have a humanitarian crisis on the scale of 300,000 people, that's going to force its way into the public consciousness. And that's why more elected officials are paying attention, because the crisis has become so severe that you can't afford to ignore it.
It was a true tale of two cities moment. Mayor de Blasio showing off a recently rehabilitated NYCHA apartment in Far Rockaway as proof that his departing commissioner, Shola Olatoye, was not being made to walk the plank. But tenant leaders who live in other dilapidated NYCHA apartments like these all over the city say the mayor is in denial.
What they need to do is come and see how the real people are living.
How are you living?
We're not living good.
Why?
Because we have busted pipes every day.
We have apartments that have had paint jobs in 10 to 15 years. We need more workers in Brooklyn houses. We're suffering out there. Heat, hot water, refrigerators, stoves. Come on. You got to be kidding me. Put some money in Brooklyn houses.
The problem, as CBS 2 recently exposed, pressure from NYCHA management on its workers to make tenant complaints disappear without doing the repairs.
Everybody's back is against the wall.
This past January, NYCHA finished the month with a backlog of more than 150,000 open work orders for issues reported by tenants. This worker, who asked to be disguised, told reporter Janelle Burrell he was asked to falsify work orders.
They're actually telling you to falsify work orders.
Absolutely. They're telling you if they're not home, close it out.
And what's their excuse?
could just tell you our counts are high. We got to get them down.
Well, I actually worked for the city council some
Yeah.
years ago. I worked for then Councilmember Priscilla Wood, may she rest in peace. And you're now one of the youngest council members, if not the youngest. What's different now? You alluded to it. I need you to expand on that a little.
Yeah, you have, when I came in 2014, about a third of the city council was under the age of 40. And we're a new class of council members who are finally benefiting from term limits. You know, term limits, which has its fair share of problems, creates space for a new generation of young leaders to emerge.
But it causes a problem for you now because now you're turned out.
Yes, so I have to retire early. But look, I'm in favor of more terms, but there should be term limits. I mean, there is because I feel like if you're entrenched in office for too long, there is a point at which you do become co-opted and corrupted by the system. And one thing that I resent is when elected officials have the mindset that they're entitled to elected office.
Right.
That you
Now-
lose a sense of it as a privilege and you start to see it as an entitlement.
And speaking to that, the mayor defends his administration against criticism surrounding this whole lead paint thing, which you really took an aggressive position on, and challenging him to the task. I guess my question is, what do you recommend at this point that takes place that puts him in position to own up to the mistakes that he's making?
He refuses to take accountability, which is why the governor had to intervene with an executive order.
Right.
And the executive order requires the mayor, the speaker of the city council, and the chief resident leader in public housing to appoint an emergency manager,
Right.
who then will appoint an independent contractor who can bypass the maze of federal, state, and local procurement rules and get boilers installed much more quickly than NYCHA ever could. Right? If the mayor cannot properly manage public housing, then we have to find someone who can and will.
Well, let me just double back a little bit. You questioned the thought process of when I said we. I've actively been in the community, working with a number of organizations,
Yeah.
community-based folks, and have been in housing developments, I can say, since 1996.
Yeah.
And what have you. Now, I'm going to give you your credit right now because you are taking an aggressive stance, and I want to elaborate a little bit more on the new committee that you have, and what is that committee to do, and what are the responsibilities?
Well, we have two ongoing investigations into NYCHA. One is regarding lead safety, because we know that there have been layers of deception and dysfunction in the lead safety program. And then we have an investigation into the heating crisis. I think we came to realize that in order for us to be effective, because the core role of the city council beyond legislation is oversight.
Right.
Is our job is to ensure that city agencies are properly managing taxpayer dollars and are operating as they should. But the trouble with oversight hearings is that we often depend for information on the very agencies that we oversee. And those agencies have an incentive to present a selective version of reality. And so we finally said, rather than take their word for it, why not conduct our investigations? And the lead safety example provides you, I think the lead safety experience provides a useful example, is the chairperson testified in March of 2016 that NYCHA was in compliance with Local Law 1, which is the lead safety law. She then found out within a matter of weeks that that statement was false. And instead of setting the record straight, she left uncorrected a false statement that she made under oath. And we did not find out the truth until there was an investigation. And so that illustrates the value of an investigation, is that we can no longer afford to accept at face value what agencies are telling us. We have to corroborate with the facts on our own.
Now, let's double back to the heating thing. You brought that up, the lead and the heating component. Now, I myself personally notified the then chair, now, Alika Ampry, that there were some concerns with regards to Robert Kraft, I believe is his name, who was, quote unquote, the person in charge of heating for the city. This guy had been demoted in a previous job.
Yeah.
And my problem now is, why didn't anybody fact check that and bring him to bear and bring him before that committee, the very committee that, you and I actually had a confrontation at? Why was he there to answer the questions of why he failed folks in housing? And I know he was also quoted in the Daily News stating that,
Yeah.
that heat should not be turned on up to a certain temperature.
Yeah, he was mysteriously absent from the hearing that we held. I feel like the buck stops with the mayor and the deputy mayor and the commissioner. I will be honest with you, I'm hesitant to target rank and file staffers. I think it's wrong for me to call out property managers or division heads. The buck ultimately stops with the chairperson and the general manager and the deputy mayor and the mayor. Those are the public officials. Those are the people who should be subject to the court of public scrutiny. I'm not in favor of targeting rank and file members of the bureaucracy.
But
Because-
they are being paid taxpayer money, so there should be some checks and balances.
Right, but the thinking is that if I'm holding Shola accountable, the pressure will be exerted downward. That's how I approach my role. I'm not.
Well, she did fire some people and what
Yeah.
have you when she should herself, and you tell me if you agree, she should have stepped aside herself.
I agree with you. I was calling for her resignation at the outset of the heating crisis, and I was alone in doing so.
Now, Ben Carson.
And I take credit for her departure.
We all contributed to that. Yeah. I'm going to jump into this. Ben Carson now, outside of all of the craziness we're dealing with, the current Secretary of Housing and Urban Development is proposing a rent increase on NYCHA residents. What's your position on that?
I think it's going to be devastating for public housing residents. Public housing is the single greatest safety net of deeply affordable housing that we have. Right? It houses a population the size of Boston. Between public housing and Section 8, you have 700,000 New Yorkers who depend on NYCHA for their housing stability and their livelihood. And the core of public housing is the guarantee that you pay no more than 30% of your income toward your rent. By raising the threshold to 35%, he's going to make our most affordable form of affordable housing less affordable for 500,000 New Yorkers. And that's going to do harm to those who need affordable housing the most.
Now, going into the thought process of the construction, the lack of construction
Yeah.
and/or repairs being made inside housing, which you made a big issue as well.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you for doing that. There's an organization called 700 Strong, which we've had the opportunity of seeing their proposals that they put out. Now, 700 Strong has a concern that NYCHA is not in compliance with regards to the Section 3 component that is federally mandated, that folks that live in lower housing,
Yeah.
lower income brackets are afforded the opportunity to get those jobs. Where can your investigation go to ensure that they are in compliance, and what would you do to ensure that people can get those jobs?
I agree with you. It's clear to me that NYCHA is not complying with Section 3, right, which is meant to create economic opportunity for public housing residents, because it's not enough to house public housing residents. We have to actually create opportunities for them to climb the economic ladder. So, we want to do a few investigations at a time, because if you do too much of everything, you'll end up accomplishing nothing.
But we do recognize that jobs are important. And
Absolutely.
and that helps to defray a lot
Absolutely.
of the violence that's being committed in our
But-
communities
but
because people don't have income coming.
I think once we bring the heating investigation and the lead safety investigation to a close, then I will have interest in moving on to Section 3 because it's been neglected.
What kind of time frame do you think that is?
I don't know. These investigations can span months, so I don't want to promise something I cannot deliver.
So it's fair to say that we really can't allow for people not to go without jobs for a long time period of time, particularly with the threat of someone actually saying, I'm going to raise your rent, and then where do they get the money from when there are jobs that exist there? And again, with the power that you now
Yeah.
have, could you not push that envelope a little bit?
We can push the envelope, and one point of hope is that with an emergency manager, might be more effective at complying with Section 3 than NYCHA ever was. And so that's the hope. So it depends on who we select as the emergency manager.
I think we talked briefly about it. You pushed for a new law requiring the city council approval for, before the mayor can fire the commissioner of any investigation. Why?
Well, it seems to me the mayor is assaulting the independence of DOI. Right? The DOI exists to be an independent agency that ensures that government remains accountable and transparent to the people.
Is that a Trumpian kind of position?
I mean, I would argue that the mayor should not fire Commissioner Mark Peters for the same reason that Donald Trump should not fire Robert Mueller. It's a simple principle. If you're the executive, you should not be able to fire the person who investigates your appointees or your administration. Right? That's a conflict of interest. Right? Mark Peters should be able to investigate corruption without fear of retaliation.
I totally agree with you on that. The other thing I want to talk about is...
And again, I'm the only council member speaking on that issue.
Yeah, no, I give you credit for that. The other thing is with regards to monies being allocated to build jails opposed to fixing up NYCHA. Here it is. We're getting $10 billion worth of commitments to build jails in the communities that people don't want, particularly in the Bronx, not far from your district. But at the end of the day, what do we do about that? What is your position with regards to these jails being built?
Look, we're not a small country in some distant corner of the world. We live in the wealthiest city in the world. We have resources to do both. And we've come to conclude as a society that we can no longer afford to have Rikers Island open. Rikers has become a symbol for the criminalization of poverty, mental illness, race. There was real violence at Rikers Island. We've decided that it's better to divide Rikers into borough-based jails. We already have borough-based jails, so there's nothing unusual here. And that's the goal. I think we can do both. I think we can create a jail in each borough and invest more heavily in NYCHA.
Well, there's a lot
We have
of
a
people in the community
$69
who
billion.
actually disagree
Yeah.
with that. I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Truth be told, I mean, I live in Canarsie. The last thing I want to do is see a jail built in my neighborhood. You know, quite frankly, we just found a dead woman's body.
Is there a courthouse in Canarsie?
Whether it's a courthouse or not, they're
So-
talking about building brand new jails.
So we're not proposing jails in residential neighborhoods. We're
You're
proposing,
not proposing, but the mayor is.
the strategic plan on which the mayor is operating proposes creating borough-based jails near courthouses, not in residential neighborhoods. So that's an important distinction that should be made.
Well, that would be different than the one they're talking about in that lot in the Bronx. That's not near courthouse, correct?
That is not, which is why we support the one near the courthouse. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know that he's aggressively moving forward to do that, but getting pushback from the community.
There is pushback, but he's also allowing the Bronx Council delegation and the borough president to come back with alternatives.
So now what happens to NYCHA when all the cameras are gone and all the hoopla, after everybody's gotten their photo ops and the whole nine? What are they to do when the cameras are gone?
So look, the point of the oversight and investigations is to keep the pressure on NYCHA once the cameras are gone. But I have to be honest with you, the bureaucracy is stubborn. And we discovered that NYCHA effectively shut down the pipeline for boiler mechanics back in 2015. And since it had no pipeline, in October of 2017, a few months before the cold spell, it lost 100 boiler mechanics overnight. And so it did not have enough staff to respond to the worst heating crisis we've seen in the history of public housing. So how do we ensure that NYCHA is not repeating those mistakes? How do we ensure that NYCHA does have a pipeline, that it's properly compensating those heating plant technicians, that it's retaining them over time, that it's training them properly? And I have to be honest with you, I've not seen evidence that NYCHA is moving the ball. There's real resistance from the mayor, from Alicia Glenn, and from the bureaucracy at NYCHA.
So
There's no evidence that the mayor is even cooperating with the governor's executive order.
So with your quote-unquote investigations of this mayor, do you find complications with you having the ability to do your job as a city council person when you're depending on some of these agencies for funding?
There are consequences that come with it, right? But I did not become a council member so that I could get $2 million for a park. I became a council member so that I can improve the livelihood of the 500,000 New Yorkers who live in public housing. So as far as I'm concerned, I have my priorities in the right place.
So you're a young guy. So that probably will be a hit on you somewhere
Yeah.
down the line. But at the end of the day, where do you go from here?
Look, I think there are elements in the political establishment that want to stifle me, who feel like I should be better behaved and I should learn how to keep my mouth shut.
No, we don't do
There's no telling what the future is going to hold for me. You know, there could be Congress, there could be borough president, there could be public advocate. All of those are options. But I just want to make the most of my time in the city council and leave behind a legacy that does right by the people who live in public housing, which includes my mother.
I'm glad we had this opportunity to talk because, from the outside looking in as a community person who's seeing the people suffer, you always gotta push the button
Yeah.
to determine who's doing what. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our community is always looking at elected officials like they're not doing a damn thing. So I give you the utmost respect in what have you because you've outlined exactly that which I had hoped to have heard from you in this particular interaction. And whatever we can do to be supportive, I'm here to do that.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the tough questions. Thank you.
Not only stuff you handle it. Welcome again to another segment of the Morning Stretch. Right here, we're in the Bronx, the Boogie Down Bronx. I'm going to put my X up. As we stand here and talk about what is happening to the residents here with the powerful young lady that I'm standing with. And I want to introduce herself and tell you what's going on.
Hi, my name is Arlene Parks, and I'm the Vice Chair and CEO of the Diego Beekman Mutual Housing Association. And I'm also Chair of Land Use Committee for Community Board 1. And I want to thank your team for coming up today to highlight this really important event. We're standing here today because Mayor de Blasio announced his plans to put a jail on this Toe Pound site, which we feel will have a negative impact upon our community and basically undermine all of our efforts to basically have a community that is safe and free from all of the issues that this jail we feel will bring back into our community and undermine 22 years of our efforts and monies that have been invested in this neighborhood to the tune of $130 million to basically revitalize this neighborhood. That's why we're here. And we just feel like we've been blindsided, that Monhaven is already unfairly overburdened with a lot of issues that other neighborhoods don't seem to get, but we do. And having this would just basically undermine this neighborhood to the point that we feel it would just suffocate us, where our families wouldn't be able to raise their families.
We'll be right back after this. I'm going to have a serious conversation and talk about what's going on.
All female single-headed households here. All female.
That means things get done.
That's what I'm talking about. I went to a meeting to talk to them about what was going on. And they told me they were really distraught because they thought that this place was going to be sold off and that everybody here was going to just be kicked out. They saw the potential of what was going to happen in the early 90s, even before we had all of this real estate development boom that we see now. And so they understood that this place was centrally located and was a gateway to the rest of the region. And it had, so accessible to everything, public transportation. They asked me if I could help, and I said yes. And so since they knew me, and they knew my grandmother, that meant that they could trust me not to sell them out. We reached into our pockets, right? When little kids was hungry, we fed them, right? Instead of kids being out on the street, we gave them jobs. You know what their jobs was? To help us organize and get the word out and tell all your friends what's going on. Mm-hmm. And philosophically, what I was just telling you, they believed in me because I wasn't telling them to look to the outside for help because of what we went through. We knew no outsiders was coming in here. The police were scared to come into Diego Beekman. And when they came in here in riot gear, right? And so, no outsider could have came in here and did what we did here. We had meetings, we petitioned HUD. As a matter of fact, the drug dealers that were in the neighborhood basically said to HUD, you deal with them because you don't want to deal with us, right? So it was this is like the place that time forgot. Very community oriented. And no place else in Monhaven, if you come here, we gonna fight. Bill de Blasio used to come up here when he was Cuomo's representative under HUD. We fought for 8 years with the government because they wanted to sell this place off, right? And we wouldn't let them. And at the end of an 8-year struggle, I can tell you the happiest moment for me, one of the happiest moments for me, was when we went downtown to HUD to sign those deeds. And we bought these buildings for $80, right? And today we got a market evaluation of $300 million. Now what's in your hand?
Nice.
What's in your hand, right? We actually have a really good relationship with the Bronx District Attorney's Office. Okay. We've got a dedicated DA just for things that are happening here so that we can meet with them to discuss cases as they come up. And then we meet on a monthly basis with NYCHA because this is a development that was project-based Section 8, and then we converted over to vouchers. Okay. And so, you can't have people being able to be here and not being held accountable, and that was what was missing before.
Where do we go from here? The whole thing now is we don't want a jail in this area with all the work that you've done. You don't want to go back to that. What happens? Where do we go from here?
Well, we just have to keep, I think, what was it, Wednesday or Tuesday?
Tuesday we had
a really good
rally.
we had a really good turning point where we had the borough president weigh in on it.
Today, residents rallied to protect that progress. They're fighting against a proposal to build a new jail here, East 141st Street and Concord Avenue. The site is currently an NYPD tow yard. Apartment buildings and schools are nearby.
Mr. Mayor, this is not the site.
It was a historic moment to have the borough president standing there at that tow pound site. The history of that site is, for me, is really profound. That's one of the reasons why we could have just selected the two sites and left that one out. But the historical significance of that site is such. That site was selected for Lincoln Hospital to be built upon because slaves did not have a place where they could basically get treated. So Lincoln Hospital was built to basically provide health care for slaves, people who were in captivity. And it doesn't escape me that here, some like centuries later, they want to use that same land, right, to incarcerate and hold in captivity our same people, right? You have our people housed on Rikers Island when that family made a small fortune doing what? Slave trading, right? So I don't want to hear anything about necessarily, I know that we need to have jails, but not like this. The system is creating criminals because they don't want to make the right investments so that people are not being held in, getting caught up in the criminal justice system. And I'll say it before, the system is failing Black men and Hispanic men like you wouldn't believe. One of the things that really upset me was the fact that they could find $17 million for jails, right? And you can't find that amount of money to repair NYCHA, $17 billion. I'm sorry, I stand.
$17 billion. I
Right,
knew what you
okay.
meant. I totally knew what you
Right,
meant.
and so you want to take this whole argument and tell me, you're going to feed me some philosophy that now all of a sudden you care so much about criminal justice reform, right? That you know, and I'm not saying, trust me now, those are our people feeding this. But I'm just trying to say, let us see real clear what's going on here. I gave you that article in the Lippman Commission, right? Because at the end of the day, it's always about the money.
About the money.
Always. Let us not forget that. So I'm just saying, we should have been engaging in criminal justice reform all along. The city of New York should have been allocating money to maintain the facility all along and not let it get into those conditions where now you have to come and tell people, oh, we gotta get everybody off of Rikers Island because of the conditions there is so horrible, right? Because of their neglect, right? And now at the same time, you have the Lippman Commission, who the essence of the commission is, criminal justice reforms, and we'll basically have a new paradigm, because this is the justification for me for closing Rikers Island down, is really to expand that airport, right, and build housing for the
co-ops, hotels,
and redevelop.
It's a land grab.
Right. And let's have that discussion, because once you start having that discussion at that level, now you're going to tell me about a community benefits agreement, and now how you going to basically make us whole here financially for absorbing. So that island, and by extension Queens, gets all of that, and the Bronx gets a neighborhood that'll be a penal colony and that will never recover in exchange for some services that we were entitled to receive all along.
What I find most interesting is that...
But if you read it,
It tells you that. But you know what?
see
You're
the plate?
you're in sync
Right.
with the Corrections Officers Benevolent Association president, the union
Yeah.
president, with regards to the same position that the corrections officers are taking. So here it is, and no one's hearing them, and what have you. And here you have community saying the same thing.
Okay, here's why. I read,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody needs to read. They need to go read that Lippman report, right? They also
And it's online.
okay,
Yeah.
and then also here is an article in Cranes Magazine that just came out, and it's how to make LaGuardia the airport of our dreams. And in there's a map of Rikers Island, and it shows how they want to do the land infill to make the runway longer, and then their proposal, right? And this is Charles Erstadt. He's the chairman of Erstadt Biddle Properties. That says his proposal is that Rikers Island and LaGuardia Airport be deeded to a New York Airport Authority, which would fill in the water separating them to create one large airport of about 1,800 acres. And what exists today could be called LaGuardia Terminal. I done said it all in a nutshell. And so that's the argument that we really need to be having here. And, let's be honest about what we're doing.
Right. Well, let me ask you this: how does the jail hurt what you're doing?
Okay. This is a scattered housing site development. It's not like a development that's closed off. And the core of our housing is along the 141st Street corridor, Cypress Avenue. And we're in the center of Mont Haven, and we're surrounded by all these NYCHA developments. The NYCHA residents are probably the most powerful people in New York City.
I say it all the time.
Only if they would only exercise their franchise, that which our ancestors died for. They're not even exercising their franchise. They won't have to live in squalid, unsafe living conditions. All they have to do is vote.
Yeah.
And what happens even without that, our kids
Can't go to certain stores. Can't go to the store.
Can't venture outside this catchment area into NYCHA projects. And NYCHA people don't come down here.
Right.
And if they do, what erupts in the streets, we have to deal with.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times on the 141st Street corridor or on Cypress Avenue, gunfire has been playing out because of the drug trafficking there, or people coming from the outside shooting up the neighborhood because of that going on here. We are surrounded by 533 shelters here. In the midst of all of this, and have a school that functions, you can't. So if you talk about putting a 1,500 bed facility in the heart of somebody's neighborhood, you driving all of that population all over this neighborhood. How are we supposed to secure the housing here? We can't. All of these, people coming into the community, coming down to go visit and all of that, all they got to do is go to 141st Street and do what? Buy their drugs. You got a loan with the city's police pension system that's on the line here, right? You talking about another $20 million that we responsible for paying back, and you creating the conditions that the other developer couldn't manage this project because of all of the drug dealing going on here. He turned the keys in and walked away. Instead of them trying to hurt this neighborhood, what they need to be doing is look and see what we did here and try to model that all over the place.
Let me ask this. So
Something's got to change here.
So now where you're at with regards to your advocating, how do you see this playing itself out right now?
Like I said, I was very hopeful and very glad that the borough president and the congressman, he was always with us. I'm glad that they stepped up to the plate. Prior to us rallying and protesting our cause, they were prepared to just do it. And I think that there is,
Were they notified of this site, or were they blindsided like a
well,
lot
let me tell you,
of folks?
let me tell you what happened here. Nobody even knew about the existence of this site, or any of these sites, until we wanted to develop it. The Speaker of the City Council, Melissa Mark Viverito, who happened to have been our council person, we actually went to her in her office and said, we want your support because we want to develop these sites
I read that story.
and have a neighborhood development plan. But everybody came up with these roadblocks, and they said to us, well, we can't give you the Toe Pound site because we don't have anything to do with the Toe Pound. So then we said, okay, let us see if it's a 4.5 acre site. We can keep the Toe Pound site there. We'll build you a brand new facility and use the European model for what they do with their cars. An automated process, so you maximize, you can pack more cars in, it's automated, and they get a state-of-the-art facility there.
What was their response?
We'll look into it. They told us, oh, we're going to support you, right? She's term limited out. What happens? Diana Ayala and
She wins.
Right, well, you know why she wins. Look at the election results. They came over here and asked us for our support, right? And we knew her, right? She was always in the district. We thought that, you know, her heart was in the right place. And we did not have any relationship with, what's his name, Robert Rodriguez. He wasn't even trying to make outreach to anybody here, do the outreach to anybody here to ask for support, right? He, you know, and so he was basically holding fundraisers with all the developers who wanted to develop Port Morris, while she knew the community because she was working for Melissa, right? And she was her representative here. So she knew who to go to ask for. So here's, you know, we liked her enough, which we've never done this for anybody else. We said, well, it's since they support our plan, right? And we know her, right? We should support her. And what did that mean? We hosted meet and greets. We invited her to our annual picnic that we have. We basically distributed her flyers. We carried her petitions. And the day of, we were knocking on doors to try to get the vote out, right? She won her election by 123 vote margin. And if Diego Beekman did not deliver for her, she would have lost the election. I wanted to just let people know that, you know, in the spirit of those people who called themselves patriots 242 years ago, who declared their independence from tyranny, today, we standing here with that same argument declaring, you know, that this community has a right to be treated fairly and equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with those inalienable rights on the foundation of which this nation is built, and that we have the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the right of public safety, right? The right of education, the quality of life, right? Which nobody believes that we entitled to receive just like anybody else in the other 5 boroughs. We are entitled to safe, affordable housing for all. And above all else, economic vitality. Because without that economic vitality, you got chaos. You got what you have in our communities. So the other part of this, you know, what I was saying is that to secure all of these rights, the city of New York is comprised of men and women, ordinary men and women, just like us around the table here, right? And they derive their powers from the consent of the governed. Does this look like that to you? That's all I gotta say. This is tyranny.
There you have it. We want to thank Richie Torres and Arlene Parks, as well as our guests from our first segment on public housing. As I travel throughout the boroughs, I'm in and out of public housing practically every day. I see with my own eyes the squalor and neglect. So I ask myself, who's at fault and how does this get fixed? Is it Mayor de Blasio who's proposing to put a new jail in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx, where we've just seen proof that such communities can be revitalized with the right investment, which isn't a new jail? Sounds like to me the only winners here are the developers, unless our elected officials stand up and get a backbone and do their job. So what I'm saying to you, the politicians, stand up and challenge the mayor like Richie Torres continues to do, because we're going to continue to hold all of you accountable to do your job.